Welcome back to another video, guys. So today we're going to be talking about the stomach. Okay, so we will be talking about the structure of the stomach. We'll talk about the syncope. We'll talk a little bit also about the histology and the blood supply. So let's get on with it. Okay, so let's have a look at the parts of the stomach first. So we got this beautiful diagram over here. So let's start by labeling it. So the first part would be this part, which is known as the fundus, followed by the body of the stomach, followed by the pyloric part, which is further divided into subsections. So what are those subsections? Then we got the pyloric antrum, the pyloric canal, and this is just generally known as the pylorus. What we have over here is the duodenum. So the pylorus basically marks the end of the stomach and the starting point of the small intestine. So the first part of the small intestine is the duodenum. And what we have over here, light in light green, would be the cardial notch. Which is basically a notch between the fundus and the cardia. What we have over here, this section, that's the esophagus. So you could say that the cardial notch is basically the demarcation between the stomach and the esophagus. Okay, so that would be all in terms of the parts of the stomach. Then obviously we can talk a little bit about the surface and the curvatures the stomach has. If we talk about surfaces, the stomach has the anterior wall and the posterior wall. And then the stomach also has curvatures, which are very important. And we will need to talk about the greater curvature and the lesser curvature. So the greater curvature would be this one here, where somewhere around here you can find the great notch. So that will go under the greater curvature, the great notch. The lesser curvature is this one here. And what you can find in the lesser curvature is the angular notch, which is normally tend to be found here towards the end of the body of the stomach. So in between the pyloric part and the body of the stomach. And that's known as the angular notch. Okay, so that will be all in terms of external structures. So we talked about the parts of the stomach, we talked about the surfaces and the curvatures. So now let's talk about the syncope. So now when it comes to syncope, we need to see what organs are basically found anterior to the stomach and what organs are found posteriorly to the stomach. Okay, so most of the times you'll be assessed on the organs that are found posteriorly to the stomach, but sometimes it's also possible that they will ask you questions about the organs that you can find in the in front of the stomach. Okay, so we'll start with their organs they find posteriorly. So now imagine that you are behind the stomach, okay? And let me try to make it look like a stomach. I think that's much better. Okay, so there are certain organs, and you need to also be able to draw the structure, the stomach, posterior aspect of the stomach. So let me quickly make a rough drawing and then I'll talk about it. I'll go through it. Okay, I think this would do. So what are the organs they find related to the posterior aspect, to the posterior wall of the stomach? Now we can start with this area, which we can highlight in yellow. This will be your spleen. Okay, then we choose a different color. Let's paint this area. And that would be the part that's covered by the diaphragm. Let's move on to the next color. This would be the left suprarenal gland, or the left adrenal gland. So let's select a different color. So if this was the left suprarenal gland, then I assume everyone would know what this is. This is the left kidney. I'm running out of colors here, but what we have over here, just giving you a little bit of time to think about what organs it could be, is the pancreas. And then finally, last one, this one will be the transverse colon and mesocolon. Okay, so this will be the organs that basically are found facing the posterior wall of the stomach. Okay, so let's go through them again. Spleen, diaphragm, the left suprarenal gland or left adrenal gland, the left kidney, the pancreas, transverse colon, mesocolon. So these are the organs found posteriorly. So now let's focus on the ones that are found anteriorly, and there are that many compared to the posterior aspect. Just a couple. This is way easier to draw. Okay, so you got 1 here, 2, and 3. Okay, again, this being the esophagus, this being the duodenum. So let's start with number 1. Number 1 would be again the diaphragm. Then we have number 2. Number 2 being the liver. And then number 3 is not actually a organ, but it's the anterior abdominal wall. And then if you know a little bit of your anatomy, you will know that the liver normally sits here, right, on the right hand side of the body, while the stomach is found on the left side. So just remember that because there is the liver is found on the left side, it would tend to cover the second part of the stomach. Okay. I think the anterior abdominal wall is a little bit easier to draw and to remember what organs are associated with the anterior wall, while the posterior aspect will you guys will need to remember them. You'll have to memorize the schematic as well as the organs that create the posterior aspect of the stomach, which are basically associated to the second part of the stomach. Okay, so that's the syncope. So what the organ essentially syncope means what organs are associated with a particular organ. So in this case with the stomach, so the stomach has organs that relate to the anterior part and other ones that are related to the posterior part. Now let's talk a little bit about just before we jump into histology about the fixation of the stomach. Now, to make sure that the stomach remains in place, there are certain ligaments that are involved to make sure that this happens. Okay, so let's name them. So let's just call this subchapter fixation. So we have the hepatogastric ligament. So this is found basically extends from the lesser curvature to the liver. Okay, so from the lesser curvature of the stomach and it goes to attach to the liver, hence the name hepatogastric ligament. Okay, so that's one of them. Then we have the gastrosplenic, and assume based on the name you guys can guess what organs are involved in those. Obviously the stomach and the spleen. Okay, so it goes from the greater curvature of the stomach to the spleen. Then the third one will be the gastrophrenic. So when we use the name phrenic, what organs do we mean? We are always talking about the diaphragm. Okay, so this is a ligament that basically extends from the greater curvature of the stomach to the diaphragm. And then the last one will be the gastrocolic ligament. And this one extends again from the greater curvature of the stomach to the transverse colon. Okay, so remember this. This one's really important. Depending on how you're going to be assessed, whether it's going to be a viva, whether you're going to be assessed through MCQs, you could be asked about the fixation of the stomach. So try your best to remember these four ligaments. Then when it comes to histology, we need to remember what parts make the stomach. So when we talk about histology, there is always a mucosa, a submucosa, and a muscular layer, as well as a serosa. Okay, so the most internal part will be the mucosa. The mucosa is basically the inner lining of the stomach, okay, which is made of gastric folds. So I'm not going to mention too much about histology, but just going to name the major parts of the stomach and what its subcomponents as well. So in the mucosa you find the gastric folds, and you can also find the salivary sulcus of Valdeia, which are basically longitudinal folds which are found along the lesser curvature of the stomach. And then let's jump to the submucosa. Right after the submucosa, we have the muscular layer. For this, what you want to know are the layers they find, the muscles that create the muscular layer. Okay, and for this there are three. There are three layers that make the muscular layer. You tend to find the oblique fibers, the circular layer, and the longitudinal layer. I'd advise you guys to open an atlas. If you have grants or netters, whatever you prefer, just go through pictures of the stomach and you'll be able to differentiate between these three layers: the oblique fibers, the circular layer, and the longitudinal layer. So when it comes to histology, there isn't much that you need to know. Just remember the major parts. So we have the mucosa, submucosa, muscular layer, and the serosa, which is the outermost layer. And what are the components of each of these part? Okay, so the gastric fold, the salivary sulcus foldea, which are found in the mucosa, and then the muscular layer, which has these three layers of muscles. Now, let's talk about the blood supply. Blood supply is very important, and many people just find it very confusing because there are so many arteries that supply the stomach. So let's talk about each one by one. Now, when someone asks you what is the arterial supply of the stomach, the first thing that you want to mention is the main branch that comes from the abdominal aorta, and that would be the celiac trunk. Okay, they could also ask you which level do you find the celiac trunk, and that's found at T12. So remember that, very important. Now, there are branches given out by the celiac trunk, which you need to remember. And those will be the left gastric artery, the splenic artery, and the common hepatic artery. So those are the three branches that you need to remember. Okay. Now, the lesser curvature, which we defined earlier, is supplied by the left gastric artery, as you guys can see over here, but it's also supplied by the right gastric artery. Now, the right gastric artery doesn't branch straight from the celiac trunk, but it's a branch of the common hepatic artery. So you can see here that it branches off, into different branches. One will be the hepatic artery proper, the gastroduodenal artery, and the right gastric artery. So the lesser curvature is basically supplied by the left gastric and by the right gastric. And remember, the left gastric is a direct branch of the celiac trunk. The right gastric is a branch of the common hepatic artery. Now, let's talk about the greater curvature, right over here. And that's supplied partly by the splenic artery. So you can see that the splenic artery basically travels behind the stomach. It's found associated with the posterior aspect of the stomach. So that one gives out the left gastroepiploic artery. Okay, and that supplies part of the greater curvature. The rest of it is supplied by the right gastroepiploic, which is a branch of this artery, the gastroduodenal artery. Okay, so the gastroduodenal artery branches into the right gastroepiploic artery, but also into the superior pancreatico-duodenal artery, which ends up supplying part of the pancreas as well as part of the duodenum. So as the name says, it's the superior pancreatic duodenal artery. So if there is a superior, there is also an inferior pancreatic duodenal artery. So just out of interest, the inferior pancreatic duodenal artery arises from the superior mesenteric artery. Just remember that. We will cover the superior mesenteric artery and its branches in a later video. So just for now, just out of interest, remember that the inferior pancreatic duodenal artery comes from the superior mesenteric artery. Okay, so then there are smaller branches, for example, the short gastric artery, which again arises from the splenic artery and that supplies part of the fundus. Also, the left gastric artery tends to supply part of the cardia and fundus at the same time. So we covered the major basically um, arteries that cover most of the stomach. The lesser curvature, the greater curvature, part of the fundus as well. Then there are smaller branches like the pyloric artery, which comes from the hepatic artery proper, which is not in this diagram, but yeah, an artery basically comes out from the hepatic artery proper and supplies part of the pylorus, the anterior surface of the pylorus. So I guess that's something worth remembering as well. But the major part that you guys might be assessed on will be the right and left gastric artery and what part do those arteries supply, as well as the right gastroepiploic and the left gastroepiploic. As long as you know you are able to name at least those arteries, you should be doing fine. But try your best to remember each part of the stomach and what those parts supply. Okay, so having said that, that concludes today's video. I hope it was useful, and if you guys enjoyed the video, put down comment down below and like the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.